that working here?
Yep.
Yeah, classy background. Thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you very much for having us all here. What a pleasure to be here at Sigtuna, and especially with the center, whose work we hear a lot about from afar. I'm afraid that, as usual, my job is to be the kind of depressing, unpleasant. It's a good thing I'm first, because everything will be uphill from here as the conference goes on. I'm going to try to set the stage a little bit and talk about where we are scientifically and politically as regards climate. Because we might as well know precisely where we stand. That will rule in or rule out all kinds of different possibilities about what we can or can't do with any reasonable expectation of success. It's better, I'm afraid, to have a pretty clear sense of exactly what's going on than to have any illusions about what might be. And so I'll begin with the very hard news and work towards a slightly more hopeful ending as I describe some of the work we've been doing. But what I want to talk about at the beginning, to set those parameters, is the science. I did write the first book about climate change for a general audience back in 1989, The End of Nature. So it means it's been out 21 years, which is about how long we've known about climate change as a civilization. Before that, only a handful of scientists working on this problem and not really talking about it. 21 years ago, we knew most of what we needed to know. When you burn coal and gas and oil, you release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And carbon dioxide, by virtue of its molecular structure, traps heat that would otherwise radiate back out to space. The only question that we didn't know 21 years ago was how quickly this would pinch, how quickly this would become a deeply dangerous phenomenon. And being human, of course, we hoped that it would take a good long while, because then it would be somebody else's problem to deal with, not ours. But as it turns out, the story of those last 20 years is that it's happening far more quickly and on a far larger scale than even the more dire predictions of 2 decades ago. So far, human beings, and these are important numbers, so far human beings have raised the temperature of the planet about 1 degree Celsius. That's the equivalent of adding about 2 watts per square meter of extra solar energy to the surface of the Earth. Okay? So neither of those sound like very much. 1 degree Celsius, 2 watts per square meter, that's like 2 of those tiny white Christmas tree bulbs, you know. 20 years ago, we would not have thought that that was enough extra energy to seriously destabilize physical systems. But it turns out that the planet was more finely balanced than we realized. And that 1 degree has been enough to get pretty much every major physical system in the world that we can study seriously out of balance and off kilter. My most recent book, which came out this year, was called Earth, spelled oddly, E-A-A-R-T-H, to kind of try and make the point that though we still have the same number of continents and though gravity still works in the same way and things, this planet is already a substantially different place than the one we were born on to. Across a wide variety of phenomena, you can see it happening. Everything frozen on Earth is now melting, and melting very, very quickly. The Earth looks completely different viewed from outer space because there's 40% less ice up at the Arctic than there was when those pictures came back from the first Apollo missions in the 1960s. The oceans, which have always been our metaphor for vastness, we would have thought much too big to be seriously affected, are absorbing so much carbon from the atmosphere that seawater is becoming steadily more acid. Its pH is reducing. It's about 30% more acid than it was 40 years ago. One could list these changes at great grim length. I won't do that. I'll just turn for a few moments to the events of the last 90 or 120 days, this past summer across the Northern Hemisphere, because they illustrate the point as well as it's possible to do. This was the warmest summer that we've seen across this hemisphere. 19 nations set new temperature records in the course of the summer. Some of them quite astonishing. I was on the phone with our 350.org crew in Pakistan in late May or early June when we got it. We were just talking about organizing strategy and things, but one of them mentioned that it was hot that day, and which I was surprised to hear because it's normally hot in Pakistan and nobody bothers to complain about it. And I said, how hot? He said, very hot. We set the new all-time Asia temperature record today, 129 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is, 53, 54, something like that, Celsius. Never had been hotter in Asia in history. That kind of heat across the hemisphere for the whole summer had all kinds of effects, which you've seen on the news night after night. The Arctic continued its extremely rapid melt. The northwest and northeast passages were both open simultaneously this summer for only the second time in history, the first being last summer. There was a yacht race around the Arctic in territory that no one thought humans would ever be able to even sail through even 5 years ago. You watched what happened in Russia, where a really remarkable heat wave. It had never reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit in Moscow before this summer. It was above 100 for 8 days in August. That heat wave set off fires across Russia, peat bogs and forest fires, and the city filled with smoke, Moscow filled with smoke. But the biggest damage, scariest damage, was to the Russian grain harvest. It was reduced enough that the Kremlin suspended all grain exports to the rest of the world for this year and maybe next year. Big news, because Russia is the world's third leading grain exporter behind the U.S. and Canada. When they did that, the price of corn on world markets and then wheat jumped about 70% over the course of 3 months, which of course made it extremely difficult for lots of people to afford their dinner. Places where people are living close to the margin, there have been food riots this summer as there were 2 summers ago. The biggest and most powerful images of the summer came from Pakistan. And to really understand them, you need a tiny bit of data about what happens as the planet warms. Maybe the most important physical fact of this century will turn out to be that warm air holds more water vapor than cold air. The atmosphere has been getting steadily moister, more humid. As the temperature rises, the atmosphere is about 4.5 or 5% wetter than it was 40 years ago, which is a very large change in a basic physical parameter. And what it does is dramatically increase the odds of deluge and downpour and flood all over the world. And we're seeing it everywhere. Someplace around the world, almost every day now, there's a storm, a kind of off-the-charts kind of rainfall event. In my country this year, we had people die, and lots of people die in big floods in major cities, in Nashville, in Oklahoma City, in Houston, in the mountains of Arkansas, along the Texas-Mexico border. I was in Monterrey, the second city of Mexico, a few weeks ago, a city of 4 or 5 million that lost much of its downtown this summer when Hurricane Alex penetrated far inland and dropped lots and lots and lots of rain. In the weeks that followed, the same things happened in Oaxaca and Veracruz. Tropical Storm Agatha earlier in the year set off amazing flooding across the highlands of Guatemala. We've seen remarkable rainfall in places like China. as the year has gone on all over the world. But the most devastating was what happened in Pakistan in the last week of July and the first week of August. Up in the region of the Khyber Pass, up in the mountains, country that in a normal year gets about 1 meter of rainfall in the course of a year, saw rainfall of about 4 meters in the course of a week. Okay? And the floods that resulted were truly amazing. We have pretty good data on most of this part of the world because the British, of course, have been interested in it for a long time, and the British are very keen on measuring everything. So there were stream flow gauges in all these parts of the world. The Kabul River, which is a major tributary of the Indus up in that Khyber area, the Kabul River had set its previous record for high stream flow at about 250,000 cubic feet per second in a flood in 1929. This summer it hit 400,000 cubic feet a second before the stream flow gauges washed away. That flood that resulted, of course, as you've seen, covered between a fifth and a third of the entire nation with water. There's still large pools of standing water across big parts of Pakistan. The New York Times estimates that at the height there were 7 million people homeless as a result. Truly one of the remarkable physical events of our time. This summer is a powerful taste of what climate change feels like in its early stages. Okay? These are precisely the kind of events that climatologists have been predicting will become more intense and more common, and indeed they are. The natural world is following the script laid out for it by our climatologists with, at this point, sad precision. Here's the thing to realize. Everything that I've described so far has happened with a 1 degree increase in temperature. Scientists are pretty convinced that we're already locked in, guaranteed another degree. That's from carbon we've already emitted. The heat is stored temporarily in the oceans before it's fully expressed into the atmosphere. There's a lag time. But we're probably already guaranteed double the level of warming that we've seen so far, and that's triggered the